All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Rushforth. I work on the JavaFX team as one of the co-leads. And I developed this presentation along with one of my colleagues, Phil Race, who is the lead of the client libs group. Anyway, we work at Oracle on the Java team, and we're happy to be here, or I'm happy to be here anyway, talking about how to build a desktop application in Java using Swing and JavaFX, and I'll talk about both of those in a bit. And also how to, once you've built that application, to deploy that application. So first we'll start with the question, why do a desktop application at all? Isn't web good enough for everything you do? And second, we'll do just a fairly quick high-level overview of JavaFX and Swing. And I'll assume that for the most part you're familiar with them, but we'll give a high-level overview of what capabilities they have. And then we're going to do a demo of an application that we built to showcase how you can deploy and develop and utilize an application that's a desktop application that integrates well with the desktop. We're going to show you how that UI was built, and then talk about how to create a package that you can then deploy to your end users. And then we'll talk a little bit, if we have time, which I'm not sure we will, we can go back and look at the demo after we've explained how it works and highlight a few pieces. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first, why a desktop application? I assume most of you are developers who are here, and one of the things we hope it will do is give your end users a better experience, because you'll be able to access features that are not available in a web application. It's really hard to conveniently do a web application that does multiple screens or multiple displays, multiple windows even on the same screen. Also, if you want to integrate well with the desktop and do things like icons and shortcuts and system tray integration, that's not something you can easily do with a web browser application either. And so we believe also that you as a developer will find it easier to maintain and have better control over your execution platform, rather than being whatever version of whatever browser your end users happen to be running your app on. You have more control over the desktop environment. And then finally, the ability to use platform libraries that might have native code, either using JNI today or also using Project Panama. The foreign function interface is previewed again in JDK 21, and it's proposed to be final in JDK 22. And so there's a number of options you can use, and that's again something you can't really do in a web application. And also, I think your end user can experience some benefits. You get better responsiveness, and by having the ability to have a shortcut or a menu item, you can have it more easily accessible for your end users. So now we'll talk about Swing and JavaFX as UI toolkits. So first of all, when I say Swing, that's just a shorthand for the entire client JDK desktop that's part of Java SE. It includes AWT, Java 2D, and Swing. But I'll just say Swing throughout most of this presentation, just as a shorthand for that. At first glance, there's a lot of similarities between those two toolkits. They both offer a fairly comprehensive set of UI controls, and they allow you to customize those controls in certain ways. They have event handling, drag and drop, window management, etc. They both provide additional graphics primitives. You can draw rectangles or other widgets that you want to do yourself that are not directly UI controls, and they both support printing. They both make use of hardware acceleration under the covers, so they're both high-performance APIs. And they both have a variety of layout managers to allow you to control how your various user interface elements relate to each other and what happens when you resize, that sort of thing. And they both provide support for assistive technologies such as screen readers and internationalization that might be important for your application. And both can be developed in your favorite IDE, which, as we learned yesterday, is probably IntelliJ, but you can use whichever one you want. But they each also have some unique things that set them apart, perhaps. The first one for Swing is it's bundled because it's part of Java SE. It's bundled and included in every JDK, whereas JavaFX isn't necessarily, although we do make it available as a download and some vendors do bundle it. JavaFX has 3D support, so if you want to draw some 3D primitives, you'll need to use JavaFX for that. It's maybe a little easier to subclass Swing components if you want to customize them that way. On the other hand, if what you want to do is take the existing components and adjust how they look, it's easier to do CSS styling in JavaFX. Swing has somewhat richer text and imaging APIs. JavaFX, however, has built-in charting. It has media, web, animation, and effects support. So which one do you choose? And the answer is you don't have to choose. You can use them together. It's not an either-or choice. They work seamlessly in the same application, so you can take JavaFX content and embed them in a Swing window. You can take Swing content and embed them in a JavaFX window. And between the two of them, you can create a first-class application for the desktop. And so with that, I'm going to go in and show you the demo of what we created. It's called Jmail because, well, we do J everything as our names of our demos and classes. And so Jmail is an application that we developed. The focus of this is on the UI. So big disclaimer, we do not have a back-end web server. So if the network happens to go down, which it has many times already today, there's only like one thing I won't be able to show you, which is connecting to an HTML page on the web. But otherwise, everything is hard-coded static data. So our focus is on the UI and on the integration with the desktop. This was all done using public APIs in JDK 21 and JavaFX 21, although we really don't use anything that wasn't available in 17. So you should be able to take this, and if you're still on 17, you can run it as well or do very similar things. And then finally, we use JDK's included JPackage tool to produce the end package that you're going to distribute. So with that, we'll run the demo. So in the interest of time, I didn't show actually compiling this application, and I'm not going to show you running JPackage to generate it, but I did, and I'll show you a couple of slides on how to do the JPackage part of it. But the end result of that is on a Mac, which is what I'm running on, it produces a DMG file that's similar to a DMG file you'd get for any native Mac application. And so we'll start the demo of Jmail by double-clicking on the DMG, and you get something that, again, looks similar to other applications you might install via a DMG file on Mac. And so I'm going to take that Jmail icon, I'm going to drag it to my application folder, and we will get an installed application, and there it is right there. And so now I'm going to launch that application and then walk through what it's done. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is that it comes up with a splash screen, and then that splash screen is going to fade out, and then we get our application. Also, you'll see up here it has enabled notifications or requested notifications be enabled. So as I said, we don't really have a web server, so we're never going to get any notifications that we have an email, but if I wanted to allow them, I would do that. So now what we have here is our main application frame that you're looking at. And this one happens to be a Swing J frame. I'll go over a little more how it's laid out, but this is a Swing J frame with a J toolbar of icons here, and a message view it's just a table view inside of a panel here. And the message body has both the message headers and the body of the message. And some of them have attachments. We also put in some support for that, and we can show how easy that is. And on the left side, we have a folder view, and this one is done with a JavaFX tree table. And so you can see they can seamlessly come in together. I can expand this. We've got a JSplit pane that allows you to do what you can with most mailers and change the relative size of the different panels that you have at your disposal. We can sort these, do all the things you'd imagine to be able to do. And now I'm going to go and walk through actually the more interesting part, which is the rendering that goes on here, and then also show some of the integration. So maybe before I get to that, there's two other things that you might notice. One is there's this little Jmail icon that we put up, and then there's an about handler. So it's very simple to do that, and I'll have a slide on how easy it is to incorporate that into your application. And then we have this system tray icon. And right now we have the ability to compose a new message. And if we had a mail server with incoming messages, we would change that icon to also show how many new messages you have. So those are all things that you can do fairly easily. And now we'll go down, and so we can either use the mouse or we can use the arrow key. And so most of this is just text, but now we're going to come to the first one that has an attachment. And so we can actually support inline HTML, email. In this case, what we did is when we recognize, well, when we load any attachment, what we do is we call the handler for that attachment. The handler for HTML attachments is JavaFX WebView. And so what we do is we, again, embed the JavaFX content right inside the swing window. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that's done. And right now, that's what this is displaying it. And so it's interactive, although this one's a very large image, and so maybe we want to just go back. In addition to HTML that's a static file, here's where if the network works, you'll be able to see it, and if not, we'll skip this one. We also can embed a URL. So we've got the ability to have either a file that's on the disk in your, associated with your attachment in your email folder, or an HTML file. And right now it looks like we don't have the network. Yeah, that's what that little spinny beach ball is all about. And I'm going to guess if I were to go here, this is the site it should be bringing up. And yeah, it looks like we've lost the network. So we won't worry about that. And hopefully I can just move on without needing to worry about it. And yes, I can. For text files, it's very easily. We'll just produce the text file in line. Images can be done inline as well. And then, in addition, we can do media. So this is done with JavaFX Media. And I don't think I need any volume on that. But so you can see this is just playing a media file. We can also pop out and go full screen. This is just using a standard JavaFX Media View node inside a swing node. So we use JFX panel to do that. And then for the next one, so we can do more though than just do static content. Even that MP4 file was just an embedded MP4 file, and you can click on it, so it's still effectively static content. We can also distribute applications this way, and so what we did is we wrote a handler for a jar file, and we recognized two different types of jar files: a jar file that's a JavaFX application and a jar file that's a swing application. This one's a swing application, and so although it looks like just static data, it isn't. I can edit it. I can do whatever you can do with a JTable, we could end up doing there. So it's not a very sophisticated application, but you could distribute something a little bit more sophisticated. In this case, we've got a JavaFX pie chart, which tells what kind of pie people like, because it's a pie chart, of course. And so, well, I like pumpkin pie best, and so that one's going to get the largest slice of pie. And then we go to this next one. We don't have an embedded handler for PDF files or Microsoft PowerPoint files. And so what we do instead, and we can actually do this, I'll show you this on the previous ones as well. For those that you either can't or don't want to display inline, you can click on these and we'll pop up a particular, whatever the appropriate application is. So it'll either be, it'll fork off using the desktop API to either PowerPoint, or if you have a PDF viewer or a browser, or whatever the correct application is for that. And so that's what we do there. And then, PDF, it'll open up whatever the PDF viewer is on Mac, its preview that it uses by default. But we can do the same thing. We can go back to here. Let's start with one of the simpler ones. So for the text one, if I click on that, it's going to pop up a text editor. And that's what we get there. Or for an image, it's going to pop up, I think this one uses preview as its default for the application. MP4 files will use QuickTime, whatever it is for your particular platform. This one for the embedded jar file, what we do is we actually launch a new JVM and just execute that jar file. And so if I click on that, it's going to pop up a new JVM that's separate from Jmail, and it's running in a separate process. So I can do that, and same with the, oops, I think I missed one. And same with the FX application. So in this case, this is popping it up straight in an FX stage and then putting the same chart that's right in there. And of course, we need to make the changes to make the proper percentage of pumpkin pie. So that's it as far as the attachments go. I think the only other thing I wanted to show you on this particular demo is that we also did a composition window. So as I mentioned, the main Jmail window is a JFrame. We created a composition window. You can either get to it from here or from here, and I'll show both. And this pops up an FX stage. So this particular one is in FX, and we can send it to anybody, CC anybody, and have a subject, and then we can start typing. Because this is a web view HTML panel, it's one of our built-in controls. We have a few automatic things, the kinds of things you would find in a mail tool. And then we have that, and then you can send it if you want. And also, we can do a reply. So if we were to click that, it's going to just pre-populate things, the kinds of things that you can do pretty easily. So it pre-populates these, but I can go ahead and change this. I want to copy myself. And then also, the system tray icon is integrated as well. Okay, and if we have time, we may come back and look a little more at that, but why don't we go back to the slides now. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we developed the application, and in particular, some of the desktop integration that you may or may not be as familiar with. We're going to help you sort of focus on the parts that we think are the most interesting for this type of an application. So we'll just show some code samples for that. We're going to show you how you can easily intermix JavaFX and Swing. And the hope is that when you do that, you'll be able to deploy. We're also going to show you how to deploy it with JPackage, and that you'll be able to build your own desktop application. So the first thing that we do is a splash screen. If you noticed at the beginning, we popped up a splash screen. Any good application that takes a long period of time, what you don't want is to double-click your application and have it just sit there with nothing happening for 5-10 seconds, because then your user doesn't know, did I double-click it or did I click too slow and I only single-clicked it? And so we're taking advantage of the built-in Java Splash Screen API. You don't even have to make any coding if you want to do the simplest one, where all you do is specify a pointer to your image, either on the command line or embedded in your jar file, and then have that disappear for a swing window when the first swing window comes up. You don't even need to add any code. You can add extra code, and we did in this particular application. Using the Splash Screen API, you can have a little bit more control over what happens when the splash screen is ready to go away. What we did in this case is we swapped it out for a window that had exactly the same content and then faded that out over time. And this is an example of, or not an example, a diagram showing the UI elements, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them. So as I mentioned, it's top-level JFrame, and we have toolbars, a JavaFX panel on the left, a content window, and message window on the right. And so, as I mentioned, the top-level window is a Swing JFrame. The toolbar is what handles the icons or the buttons that enable certain actions. The folder list, messages list, and messages were done with, in the case of the folder list, the JavaFX tree view, that we had to embed in a JFX panel, which I've mentioned a couple of times, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that. And then we use a JTable and a JPanel for the message list. And then we had a split pane, which I showed you, that allows you to vertically change the size like you would in any normal mailer. and finally a JEditor pane, which is used to display the HTML content, and then 0 or more JPanels below that to handle the attachments. One thing of note is that you can use grid bag layout for Swing and grid pane for JavaFX to get the most flexibility, but both toolkits also give you simpler layout containers you can use. So for the system tray and desktop notifications, that turned out to be just a very few lines of code. As you can see, it's about 5 or 6 lines of code to get the system tray, put a pop-up menu in that, which is what we did when we popped up a menu for compose. And then you have the compose messages. And then the last couple just added into the system tray. And that's supported on all the platforms that have system tray type of UI, which most modern desktops do. And then the about handler was just also a few lines of code. Because it's an optional feature, you have to check to see whether it is. And what we do is we use the desktop class, which if you're not familiar with it, is the class that provides most of the integration with the native platform in the Swing toolkit. So now a little bit about interop. There's two-way interop. JFX panel provides one way, which is JavaFX content into a Swing app. And then I'll talk about Swing Node on the next slide. So if what you have is a main Swing application, either because that's what you've written or that's what you had to begin with, or you need a third-party widget that is existing in Swing, then what you do is you can create a JFX panel. And a JFX panel extends JComponent. So you can use it anywhere a JComponent can be used. So the way to think of it is JFX panel is a JComponent, and it contains an FX scene. And so you put all of your FX content into that, and now you take this JFX panel, which is a JComponent, and you put it anywhere in your Swing app that you'd like to do. And that's just a simple one of putting a button in there. Conversely, if you have a JavaFX application, but you still need to display a little bit of Swing content, you can do that too using Swing Node. So Swing Node extends JavaFX node. So it's a node in the scene graph like any other node in JavaFX. You put it in your scene graph, and it contains as content a Swing JComponent. And so you can put any Swing component. You can put something as simple as a button or as complex as a JPanel with an entire embedded application in it. So if you're familiar with Swing Set 2, we had a demo that I don't happen to have it with me, but we had a demo where what we did is we popped up an entire Swing Set 2 inside of a JavaFX node, and it works just fine. So the Compose window, as I mentioned earlier, is a JavaFX stage. And so you can have top-level windows of both. So you don't even have to limit yourself to one type of top-level window. And so this one was a top-level JavaFX stage, and all the content in here. I'm not actually showing Swing Node, but we could have. And we have the usual set of characters. We have buttons, labels, text fields to do the stuff for the, to modify the message, header, recipient, subject, that sort of thing, and to send it and save it. And then the content window is an HTML editor, which is, it uses WebView underneath to render it, but it's a JavaFX control that provides you a number of built-in icons. So all of these, the icons to do the kinds of things you could do in a very simple document editor, are built in as part of HTML editor. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we implemented all of the different handlers for the different content types for attachments. So the text one is very trivial. So all of the content handlers look pretty much like this. They have a method that returns a JComponent or a subclass of JComponent and ends up doing whatever it needs to do. It's passed in the information it needs, usually a file name, and then it does whatever it needs to do to generate that content. In this case, we just create a JText area with the content from the text file that we've read in. And in the case of image, very similar thing. What we do is we use image.io to read in the image, and then we have a subclass of JPanel. That this is our JComponent that we're going to end up returning. And what we do is override the paint component method, and we draw the image. In this case, we draw it scaled because it could be a huge image, and we don't want to have something that doesn't fit in our window. It's not a very pleasant experience for the user. Okay, so for media, now we're getting to our first content handler that had to deal with FX content. And so what we ended up doing here is create, again, this same method. We created a method that would create the content given the handler, and all it passes in is the URL of the media file, the MP4 file. And in this case, well, we still return a J component. In this case, it's JFX panel, but as far as the caller is concerned, it's just a J component. And so what we're doing is we're using the standard FX classes to do media, media player, and media view. The media view is the thing that actually visualizes it in the scene graph. And then we wrap that into some controls. So we've got the play pause button that I showed. We have a time slider, so you can slide that. It's actually active, and a time index, and then a full screen button and volume button. And then ultimately, we put the media control widget into a scene and return that to the JFX panel. Similarly, for HTML content, we use JavaFX's web view very much like we used media view in the previous one. So we create a JFX panel, and inside that we're going to put a layout container, a very simple one, border pane, because all we want is the main content of the web page in the middle, and then we put a few very simple controls. We just wanted a forward, back, and reload button, and so that's what we put in there. And then again, we create a JFX panel and set the scene on that, so it's very simple. The content handler for JavaFX and Swing applications was pretty similar between the two, so we created a base class to handle the load the jar file, look for its main class, and then figure out what it is. So that's all done in the super class, the Java content class. And then after we've done that, we double check, is this an instance of a Swing UI? And if so, we're going to actually instantiate it and add it into our JPanel. And similarly for JavaFX, except our panel in this case is a JFX panel, again, a subclass of J component. And we end up doing something very similar to what we did on the Swing side. So for external applications, there's two different cases we had to consider. There's actually three. There's one case was the case of a Java application where it's either an FX or a Swing application. We have the same code for handling this. So if somebody clicks on py.jar or table.jar, we don't care which it is. In this case, all we know is it's a jar file. And so what we're going to do is we're going to find the version of Java we're going to execute. And then we're going to call process builder to run the version of Java that we executed with the jar file that we did. In this case, it says py.jar, but when the handler gets called, it's got the name of the jar in a URL file, and so we would just pass that along. We also, the second mode we have is if it's an HTML content, then we use the Java Desktop's Browse API, and that just pops up the system browser. And so in this case, it would be Safari would be the default on Mac unless you've changed it. Edge would be the default on Windows unless you've changed it. And it'll honor whatever you've changed it to. The desktop API just calls into the OS and says, use your default browser. And for every other kind of content, whether it's PDF or MP4 or JPEG, it's going to call the desktop open method, which is just going to pass the file type, the MIME type, to the open method, which is implemented for each operating system as go get the default application for this type of content. And then it's up to the application, or sorry, the platform to decide what to do with it. And ones that can't, you'll probably see the same thing as if you double click a jar file it doesn't understand. It will pop up something that says, what application would you like to use to run this? So it's fairly straightforward. So what isn't in the demo is a bunch of things. We showed you a lot of things, but what isn't in there is we didn't use any custom look and feel or CSS to style this. You'd probably want to in a real application. We didn't show you how to integrate drag and drop. And we didn't do a lot of animation or graphics effects because we were really more focused on the desktop integration. So now that you have your application, you compile it into a jar file and you're ready to deploy it, how do you do that? The easiest way to do that is using the JPackage tool, because not only do you get to embed, you get to include the JDK and your jar file, you also get to include the icons, any other customization, and out will pop, depending on what platform you're on, either a DMG file on Mac or an EXE on Windows. Or whatever the equivalent is, an RPM file on Red Hat Linux. And the way you do that is by creating a custom JDK. In this simple example, I show it just using every package you can find, every module you can find. But if you know your module or your application only uses 5 different modules from the JDK, you might need the desktop module, everything needs the base module, and couple of the JavaFX modules and 1 or 2 other things, and then that's all you need. Then you could build yourself a custom JDK that just has the pieces you need. But in this case, we didn't want to have to show that. So I'm creating a new JDK that's really got the entirety of JDK 21 and JavaFX 21. And so then once we have that, we can use that to compile and execute the program. So while we're debugging, we'll use that same JDK to compile and execute, make sure it runs. And then at the end, when we're ready to package it up, we'll run the jpackage command, give it our jar file that we've created, as well as a pointer to the custom JDK, and a few other parameters, basically to tell where to find the jpackage and where to put the packaged output. Since we're talking about wanting to integrate better, we want to do certain things like create menus and shortcuts. So on Windows, you'd probably create an entry in the system menu so that it shows up there, or you might create a shortcut, or both. In both cases, for Windows and Mac and for Linux, you'd want to give it the set of icons that you do, so your splash screens will show up. And you can use a number of other platform-specific options to code it up however you want. So for RPMs, there would be additional ones as well. And so there's documentation on JPackage along with the JDK 21 docs. So in looking at this, we have a little bit more time maybe to look at the Jmail app, but not much. I want to make sure let's see, what time is it? Yeah, I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions. So for it with that, I think I'll get back to this. So you can see, first thing to see is notice that it fades out whenever I do that. So that was that little bit of code that I mentioned. So I guess I'll show running. Yeah, so we can run it either from there or. Let's see. Let me just try one more thing. So just like any others, you move it to the trash, and I'll just show running this one more time to see. So this is so when you run jpackage and create a DMG file, you don't have to specify anything else. It creates using the icon that you've given it as, this is my program's icon. So this one comes from the same icon set that will give us the icon of the jpackage installation itself and the splash screen. We sort of use similar icon sets for all of them. And then once we drag it over to here, it installs it, and then again we can double click and run that. So that's probably enough for showing the demo. But maybe we can have you guys ask some questions when we're done at the end. So I'll go back and just wrap up at this point. So in summary, we've shown you how to build a modern desktop application using both the Swing and the JavaFX APIs, and how to integrate that in with the desktop. Shown how easy it is to handle multiple content types in an application, and then how to use jpackage to package up your application. And so hopefully you have enough information to be able to build your own Java desktop UI application. And so we'll go ahead and take some questions now. And so just while we're waiting for questions, I'll leave this up here. I have 2 other sessions. These 2 will be focused on JavaFX. So we'll have a developer's BOF tonight that Johan Voss and I will be there to answer your questions, talk with you about what you'd like to see in JavaFX. And then I have a technology preview of something called JavaFX Notebook tomorrow at 9:30. So we have time for some questions. So yes, over there. It has gotten somewhat better. There is support for, I mean, there's been support for integer, like 1, 2, 3x in there. The support for, fractional DPI is still perhaps lacking a little bit, but it supports all the same APIs as far as multi-resolution images, so you'll have that. But no, the support is certainly better on Mac and Windows. Yes, back there. No, you can't, because you have to have a JDK that you're running on, and it relies on platform-specific tools. That's one thing I know a lot of people ask for that. Every time we do a JPackage-centered talk, that is a question we always get. Without having some sort of container environment, which would probably be the easiest way to solve it, it would rely on us either being, what we'd basically have to do is we'd have to duplicate the functionality of things like the packaging tools on, the Red Hat packaging tools on Linux, or the Microsoft Wix tools that do exe installers. And so doing all of that, that's actually the harder part. It wouldn't really be that hard for us to point to a JDK that was a different architecture and suck that in, as long as we didn't. What we wouldn't be able to do, though, in that case is you wouldn't be able to run JLink to shrink down your application. But if all you wanted to do is take an existing fully built JDK from one platform and the other, the hard part is still going to be the native tools to do the packaging. So that's a long way of saying, no, sorry. Yes?
One of the things that we've done to get around that
Mm-hmm.
is, because I'm talking to them now.
Yeah, go ahead.
We use GitHub for one of our projects to do this. The GitHub Actions workflow basically is a little bit of YAML and some Gradle script, and then it's just like any color you like. And there are limitations if you don't want to pay any money. Like there's only so many of those builds
Right.
set up, but you pay a few dollars and get a few extra, and that includes JPackaging for. We've gotten it to work for Mac OS, both architectures, Windows and Ubuntu. So it's totally doable.
Right. Yeah, that's a good thing. I hadn't even thought of that as a free solution, because the other thing is if you contract with some other build farm, but there you've got the Microsoft Azure build farm right there at your disposal for if you use GitHub Action. So that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, JavaFX has an application thread that's separate from the swing thread. Did you have to deal with any of that in this application?
In this one, we didn't have to deal much with it because we didn't have any interaction between the two. So all of the JavaFX events just deal with those JavaFX objects. I know you guys have had to deal with that in the past. And we have an experimental one, which I know you're aware of, that it isn't fully supported, where you can actually unify that and use the AWT event thread as the FX application thread. That has its own set of problems, though. So it's okay as long as you don't need to do interaction between the components. So no, we never had, even once when we were doing all of our demos and testing, a hang-up as a result of that. We just let each one have its own event thread. Yeah, any other questions? Yes?
What's a recommended distribution method so that the app auto-updates, checks for updates, etc., like a Java Web Store like?
Right. So that's one thing we don't have support for in JPackage. So you basically would have to do your own web server that has it do that. We've talked about having some utilities that would be part of JPackage to do that, but currently that doesn't exist. Sorry.
There's a couple open source tools out there.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Really good, actually, for that.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Thank you. Any others? Yes.
There's a lot of talk about ahead of time compilation
Mm-hmm.
this week. Is that something
It certainly could if you were to use one of those technologies like, say, GraalVM. I know people have gotten JavaFX to work with that. It helps mostly on startup, a little bit on footprint perhaps, but I think there's a lot of things you can still do with using JPackage and JLink to, the main thing is just getting rid of the stuff you don't need, and that you can do with JPackage and JLink. But the biggest thing you'll get from the ahead of time is startup. Any others? All right, well, thank you.